So first of all, everybody welcome. Feel free to open cameras, and we like to make it interactive, and we want to see you. Make sure we have a good time while learning about this topic. I'm Tom. I'm from GRSee Consulting. I'll be moderating this discussion. And I think we'll start with a quick round of introduction of our panel. We have Jody Daniels. Say hello, Jody.
Hello.
Great. We have with us also Dan Or-Hof.
Everyone.
Or-Hof Law. And we have Ben-Aderet from GRSee. Maybe we'll do like a few minutes, just a few sentences, and each one of you can tell us a bit about themselves. So Jody, go first.
Absolutely. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Jody Daniels. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm the CEO and privacy consultant at Clover Advisors. Think of us as the fractional privacy office. We're all about making data privacy simple and helping companies comply with various privacy laws. Glad to be here, and thanks for joining.
Amazing. Thank you, Jody. Dan?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Dan. I'm an Israeli and a New York attorney. I had my own firm here in Tel Aviv. I'm based in Tel Aviv, and I'm also the founder and CEO of Strand Advisory, which is a privacy and cybersecurity consulting company with outreach in the US, EU, and Asia. And I'm responsible for making things maybe more complicated than Jody, because my practice is related to the legal side and compliance, not just the internal compliance aspects. But in any case, our job is, of course, to make things more easy for companies to handle privacy and data protection compliance requirements on global scale. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Dan. Ben, be our guest.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Ben-Aderet. I am the co-founder of GRSee Consulting. We're a cybersecurity consulting agency. I'm also the co-founder of another company called Consilium Labs. Consilium Labs is a certification body accredited by the ANAB, and we provide ISO 27001 and ISO 27701 audit services.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Ben, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. So I think the first thing we want to tackle is, I know we're going to talk about ISO 27701, but and we know that privacy is on the rise, but Jody, I want to ask you a quick question about what do you see, what's the difference, the actual difference between privacy and security? Because we see a lot of times that CISO of the organization is the one in charge of privacy, and sometimes it's a bit borderline to actually understand. So what's your stance on the difference? You're on mute, Jody.
Yes, muted, of course. Barking dog in the background. They're really interchangeable. The way, at a very simple level, I like to explain it, is you have all the data and you put it in one central place. You want to protect it from bad people getting to it or unauthorized use of it. So you're trying to make sure that it's well protected. But that doesn't have anything to do with how I can use it and how I've told the customer why I've collected it and how I'm using it. If you kind of think of your house, if you locked the doors and put your alarm on and had gates all over your windows, you're trying to protect someone from coming in. No one else is allowed in unless you have the special alarm system or the key. But you could have all the windows curtains open and anyone can peer on in and can see what you're doing. So the privacy and the security pieces are a little bit different. If I have all of the doors unlocked, there's no security, but I have all my windows closed, then I'm trying to be more private. So the intersection is, if there's a breach, now I have a security incident, my data has been released, it shouldn't have been, there's that interplay with security. But the privacy laws have that part and a significant focus on why am I collecting it, why am I using it, and who am I sharing it with? Notice and choice are some very basic privacy principles.
That. So I think the next question, after we kind of understand what's the difference is, and you know that we have the 27001 and the 27701, Ben, this one is for you. Can you tell us shortly a bit the ISO 27 family and talk about the 01 and the 701?
Yeah, of course. So, so you know, the ISO 27001 family, I mean, the ISO 27K family or 27X family is actually, it's a set of framework. I believe they have around 40 frameworks nowadays, and it covers anything from basic information security to incident response to storage, encryption, and now even privacy as well. And they have, again, they have all kinds of frameworks out there. Some of them are auditable standards. Others are just like, you know, are there for guidance and information. Specifically the ISO 27001, I think that's the most known one right now. You know, this one provides you with a very basic framework and foundation to how you go about in setting up your ISMS. ISMS stands for Information Security Management System. I always like to, you know, equate it to basically a compliance program or a cybersecurity program. It really provides you with a very high level foundation. On one hand, it's very high level. On the other hand, it plays well together with the rest of the standards out there, so you can always expand and introduce whatever you'd like to include the ISO 27701, which is actually, you know, an extension of the ISO 27001. So you have to be ISO 27001 certified before you can obtain the ISO 27701 certification. I'm hoping this like provides, you know, like a very high level description on this family of standards, but open for any question from the audience.
Yeah, sure. So as Ben said, by the way, if you have any questions, something you can write to me, I will ask it, or you can just raise your hand and we'll be happy to answer any questions anyone have. But Ben, if I summarize what you say, basically the ISO 27001 is the basic one. You have to be certified to it in order to progress to any other of the ISO certification. And in this case, both 27001 or the 27701 are accredited.
Yep,
okay,
that's correct.
Cool. And so I think one of the questions that a lot of the people here want to know if it's a GDPR certification or it's not. So this question is basically for all the people, but I really want to hear what Dan has to say according to his smile. So how does the GDPR and the ISO 27701 play together? Is it a GDPR certification?
Yeah, Tom, thanks for the question. So, you know, let's start with the bottom line. And the bottom line is that an ISO 27701 certification is not a GDPR certification. However, it can be quite beneficial for companies to demonstrate that they're compliant with the GDPR. So there's a sort of a fine line between the two. The certification program or the certification requirements under the GDPR are quite different than the certification process for ISO standards. It's a sort of a mechanism that the European has put in place and embedded into the GDPR, and it's a process where the European organs, such as the data protection supervisory authorities, can provide a sort of an accreditation for certification bodies, which will then in place will be able to provide a certification to companies. And these certifications could help companies to demonstrate that they are either compliant with the GDPR in general or compliant with certain aspects of the GDPR, for example, for the data transfer aspects or for any other specific areas of compliance that are required under the GDPR. So it's a sort of a process which is governed by European bureaucracy, which is different, as we can understand, from the ISO certification standard process. However, the ISO 27701, as you know, those who opened the standard and could get a good understanding that this standard is predominantly based on the controls and measures that are required under GDPR. It even has a certain specific annex that provides a sort of a comparison table between the sections under the ISO standards and the relevant sections and recitals under the GDPR. So there is a very close link between the two. And it means that a company that goes through the ISO 27701 certification will be able to demonstrate that they have a sort of a management system to control the all the requirements, the compliance requirements under the GDPR. So it could be helpful, but it's not a GDPR certification. You will still need to be able to show that you don't only have the necessary control under the standards, but that you've included some substance into, and you've put in place substance into these controls and comply in practice.
Okay, cool. Ben, Jody, anything you want to add on Ben?
I'd love to just echo what Dan, you said. And often I feel like there are companies, you've done a great job comparing them. And just to emphasize, there's not a GDPR certification today. There's not a stamp. Anyone trying to tell you that one exists and here's your fancy GDPR certification seal has sold you a bill of goods. So this is kind of the next best option out there.
Yeah, and I just wanted, I'm trying to put myself at in the seat of the CISO here, or even the privacy officer of a company. And I'm assuming, a question that might arise is, okay, if we look at, Annex D in the ISO 27701, as you refer to it, Dan, the one that actually maps all the controls, not all the controls, maps controls from the ISO 27701 into the GDPR. I believe, a question might arise that basically asks, okay, so what do I need to do extra? What do I need to do more in order to feel that I am, if not, for a lack of better term, if I'm not GDPR certified, so at the very least GDPR ready or compliant?
Let me give an example of it. I think that maybe some of our audience know that the Europeans have changed, made some significant changes into their data transfer rules. This is a result of the Schrems 2 case from last year, and a result of the latest publication of the new standard contractual clauses and the European Data Protection Board's recommendations on supplemental safeguards for data transfer. So the whole area, the compliance area of data transfer has changed. And with this change, there are certain additional control or additional processes that you need to do under the new scheme, the new European scheme, in order to be fully compliant with the requirements under both the GDPR and the new standard contractual clauses. One of them, for example, is the need to conduct a data transfer assessment, and that assessment is governed by specific requirements under specific sections of the new standard contractual clauses. The ISO 27701 does not include any reference to this transfer assessment. So this is a sort of an additional control or additional substance, as I referred to earlier, that you need to do in order to comply with the new requirements under the GDPR. And you can do that by adding the necessary substance into the controls of the ISO 27701. So essentially, you would still need to have the necessary guidance in order to know exactly what you need to do under the controls or the specific control sections under the ISO standard. This is a sort of a mixed type of work that you need between governance, compliance professional with some legal guidance that will provide you with the necessary assistance, because you need to understand that when you're talking about the GDPR is not a law, it's a legal ecosystem, and it changes all the time. You have guidelines, you have court decisions, you have a lot of changes that are going on. It's a dynamic type of instrument, unlike an ISO standard maybe, and therefore you need to be on top of these changes and the new interpretations and the new rules that are coming once in a while in order to get a better understanding of what you need to do in practice. So as I said, it's a sort of a joint work that you need to do all the time in order to make sure that you are compliant with the necessary requirement on the GDPR. And maybe just one more point, and this is something that a lot of our clients are encountered with, and that is that a lot of companies today need to comply not just with the GDPR. And ISO 27701 is heavily invested in the GDPR controls and GDPR requirements. So you may need to adapt yourself to additional requirements under other laws in the US, in Asia, in other places. And again, you will need to add some additional substance, legal and regulatory substance into the control that you put in place under the standard.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add here, and that was a good point I believe Dan has made. But you need to consider, so a few points I wanted to make. One is when an auditor comes in, they will actually, look into your privacy information management system, and they will be looking for all those communications and updates with your legal team. They would want to see that you're staying up to date and current with the ecosystem as Dan just described it. That was one point I wanted to make. The other one was so the ISO 27701 and actually the ISO 27001 as well are there to provide you with a framework, as I said, but they are not obsolete. I mean, you can always add additional controls. You can take the statement of applicability that you have, and you can add whatever controls that as you see fit and as you need for your business. So whether if you need to comply with CCPA as well, or SHIELD or DFS or any of those could potentially, be a part of your privacy information management system.
I agree. I mean, it relates, take privacy by design, for example, which is, again, a requirement of the GDPR and a control under the ISO 27701. Privacy by design is a concept, and it constantly changes depending on the type of products and services that you provide and the changes that you put in place in relation to them. So that would be, a good example for it.
Yeah, and I would add that, Ben, you had mentioned GDPR is not the only law out there, right, that companies need, I think it was Ben, that need to adhere to. There's a series of others. So what ISO does so nicely is it creates a framework, it creates a foundation. Here in the United States, we have California, soon to come Virginia and Colorado. China's passed one. We're just on a myriad of privacy laws, and having a single set of controls that's a really strong foundation will be very helpful.
Okay, cool. So it's a good framework. It can help you manage and govern the privacy issues, but still you'll have to do adaptation to different geographies and in different. Cool. So I think, Jody, next question is for you. So you provide as part of Red Clover Advisory CPO services at different companies, and I think it would be beneficial to hear from you. What do customers do wrong? Like, where do they usually? What's the major pitfalls when it comes to privacy?
We only have a little bit of time, don't we? I think the biggest one is creating something that's sustainable and having a data inventory, because so often people begin with the outside, and that makes sense. People can see your privacy notice, people can see a cookie banner, and then they're like, okay, I'm good. Now, those of you here appreciate it's much more complex. That's why we're talking about a very complex framework. And to do that, the starting point is really going to be to understand your data. Once you do all that, and maybe you create your policies, you go through the whole process. Once you have your controls, your policies, your people, your data, your external notice, it's not pencils down. That's just the foundation. That's the beginning. Privacy professionals actually said when GDPR came around, when May 25th, 2018 came, businesses were like, woohoo, I'm done, I made it. And all the privacy professionals, woohoo, we're starting. And right there is a bit of the disconnect, because we all knew this was the beginning and it needs to continuously be maintained. And as you're expanding, creating a new product, launching a new marketing campaign, creating a new venture, bringing on a new vendor, or changing an existing piece, you want to be mindful of the privacy pieces. So just like people ask, how much does it cost? What technology do I need? What people do I need? Do I need a contract? We need privacy to literally have a seat at the table. And to me, I mean privacy and security together. They both need a seat at the table. It should not be an afterthought all the way kind of towards the end. So those are the really big areas that I see that companies could use a little bit of extra help on.
Okay, Ben?
I would say, yeah, I definitely echo what Jody's just mentioned, and I can add that, from my own perspective, scalability is the issue, because data protection laws tend to require companies to put in place processes. And when a company needs to comply with various data protection laws in multiple jurisdictions, they need to put in place a great deal of processes. And nowadays, even if the privacy tech industry is thriving and there are a lot of tools that companies can use, still there are a lot of processes which are not fully automated. And on the other hand, a lot of processes, I mentioned data transfer assessments. These type of processes, and this is just a single process that companies need to do. They require a great deal of resources in order to conduct them. And potentially companies would need to do dozens, maybe hundreds of these types of assessments. It's not scalable when you do it manually. And I think that automation is the great challenge. And I think that what companies would need eventually, even small and medium size, not just enterprises, are fully automated solutions in order to be able to cope with the vast amount of requirements, of compliance requirements that they face in practice.
Okay. Thanks for that. Ben, anything from your perspective?
So I think my thoughts are very similar to what Jody had mentioned. I think privacy needs to have a seat at the table, and I think the way organizations treat privacy, or PII mostly, needs to be streamlined. So it needs to be part of of doing business. That's at the core, basically, of all those new laws and regulations. It started with GDPR, but it's only progressing. And in the past, we used to consider PII as one data element that an organization might consider as sensitive. Now we are mandated to do so. So privacy needs to have a seat at the table, and how we treat privacy, private information, needs to be streamlined and needs to be a part of doing business, basically.
Okay, cool. So I want to take this discussion out to a bit of a more practical aspect, let's call it. And I think, Ben, we'll start with you. Let's talk about the main concepts and requirements that ISO 27701 discuss. I know it's pretty similar to the GDPR, because as Dan mentioned, it's heavily based on it. But let's hear what you have to say about the main concepts and requirements.
Yeah, so in order to really explain the ISO 27701, one needs to understand that ISO 27001, because the structure is very, very similar. So just to try to simplify, with ISO 27001, at the end of the day, you have basically a checklist of things to consider, things you need to do, documents you need to put in place, and policies and processes you need to put in place. And you have to have all of those ready to go before you expand into the ISO 27701. So typically what will happen from a practical standpoint, an organization would implement the controls that are deemed necessary under the ISO 27001 and then add the controls from the ISO 27701. And, and obviously those controls might involve a lot of involvement with the legal department as well. Those controls, they vary. And as we mentioned already, I think a lot of them are mapped to the GDPR articles, mostly 5 to 49, with the exception of Article 43. So, and those controls touch upon like most of the domains in as we know them in privacy, anything from consent, data transfer, the need for processing, all the key areas that we know from GDPR, those are, addressed in the ISO 27701. What would typically happen from a practical standpoint, an organization will go through a stage 1 audit for ISO 27701, and then they will add, the extension for the 27701, and similarly to during the stage 2, once the auditor covers all the controls that are deemed necessary out of the 27001, then they will move to the 27701. So the structure is very similar in that sense. I hope it answers the question, but if you have, if the audience have any, focused questions, I could try to address those.
You're on mute, Tom.
We'll be happy to take any questions from the audience. If anyone has anything to ask, you can do it now, you can do it later. Anyone? Anything? Maybe later. Okay, cool. So, Dan, Jody, anything about the standard that Ben didn't mention that you think is worth mentioning at this point? Okay.
Jody, go ahead. I mean, ladies first.
Cool. Now we can move on to the next one. So we talked about the audit process and the stage, but let's talk about the readiness part a bit. Can you give us a few tips or a few recommendations for companies that start the process? What to look for, what to pay attention to, how to make it work better?
Yeah, I mean, that's a broad question, but I believe, unlike cybersecurity, you need to have, you need to have a focal point that knows how to manage this program internally, but you also need to be reliant on privacy experts, such as Dan and Jody here. You need to really understand the the ins and outs of the privacy ecosystem that you need to be compliant with, whether it's GDPR or CCPA or the new ones coming here in the US. And the ISO 27701 is there to allow you to set the boundaries and to allow you to have a framework, basically. But then you need to put content into those controls and to put the right context in place. And this is where you need to be very heavily involved with your legal team, with privacy experts, and just for the sake of really building a privacy information management system that is scalable. But curious to hear your thoughts here, Jody and Dan.
Exactly. So I think, as you mentioned, put content into it, and it was one of the tips that both Jody and Dan discussed. That it's a framework that it requires the company to fill in the content. So let's talk about the content a bit. Dan, we know the New York Shield. We have the GDPR. We have the CCPA. You said something about China and Asia. What are the most common elements? What content are we looking for? What tips do you have to someone who is new to the privacy world? I know it's very broad, but let's see. I'm tackling you here, and let's see how it goes.
Yeah, well, thanks. That's a challenging question. I'll try to answer it. So essentially, I would say that there are a few trends in data protection laws nowadays. When we, looking from a global perspective, and this is something that, again, a company that works in multiple jurisdictions need to take into consideration. So there are the GDPR family, so to speak. So there are a great deal of countries that have already adopted or are in the process of adopting laws which are fairly similar to the GDPR. Serbia, for example, has an exact copy of the GDPR, which was embedded into local Serbian laws. The Brazilian LGPD, the new Chinese privacy law, is fairly similar to the GDPR. Cayman Islands law is quite similar to the, so there are a lot of examples to it. So it's one fairly large family of laws, of modern laws that have, so to speak, the same type of principles, more or less. And I would say that the ISO 27701 fits them almost perfectly. And then again, there is a different type of legislation that we need to take into consideration. There are two types of them, I would say, two additional families of laws. The first would be those laws that put a great emphasis on information security. And the New York Shield Act, for example, is a good example for it. And we see some examples for these types of laws in other US states and outside the US as well. And this type of focus, I would say that it aligns predominantly with the ISO 27001. And this is something that companies may want to consider, because the ISO 27001 could be helpful to achieve a great deal of the compliance that these companies need in relation to these types of laws. So New York has one, and there are a lot of other US states. Here in Israel, we have the data security regulations, which are fairly similar, and there are other jurisdictions that have the same type of legislation. And there is the third family, and the third family relates to specific laws. Specific privacy laws, which will refer to financial data or health-related data, or clinical trials, or smart cities, or drones, or other specific areas where legislators have decided that they need to put in place specific laws. And these laws tend to have specific requirements. And these specific requirements are not necessarily aligned with the ISO standards. So if you need to be compliant, not just with the general data protection or privacy legislation, but rather with a more case-specific segmental type of laws, then you will definitely need to add to your compliance efforts some additional regulatory and legal work. So the situation is quite complex, and I think that the first thing that a company needs to do, and need to do properly, is to make the necessary assessment of which laws apply to the company. Don't run and do compliance work that later on you will understand that is redundant or irrelevant to you. This type of assessment is crucial, and sometimes the compliance that you need to do, for example, I don't know, the GDPR compliance could be relevant just to relevant and specific aspects of your activities or your operations. So this is a very important assessment that you need to do before you make any compliance efforts, whether it be with the aid of ISO standards or not. So that would be, I would say, my 2 cents about looking at the broader perspective of compliance and make the right decisions about it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dan. That's helpful, I'm sure, for a lot of people here. Jody, your golden tip for privacy for the new Privacy 101.
I'm going to sound like a broken record of know your data, but I just can't emphasize enough that is literally the start of all of it. Even all these controls, you can't build them or enforce them if you have no idea where or what. And businesses change. When you do it on day one, 3 days later, the business might be doing something different. It's really important to be able to maintain that and have a process for staying connected to the business and really getting the business to understand all of this is critical, it's important, it's required in some instances, but it's also an enabler. It's a way to help businesses be more efficient. You might find redundancies. You might be able to identify places where we don't need certain systems. Instead, we can do it a little bit differently. And all of this is then able to create trust and serve as a sales vehicle for companies. So I don't want anyone to think it's only this kind of bottom of the barrel checklist requirement compliance item. It's all of that and very important. And it also is something that's going to enable a company to be able to grow and move forward and be a competitive differentiator compared to the company or your competitor over here who is not.
Okay, cool, thanks.
And just to add to Jody's comments, it can also help you like better design applications and platforms going forward, you know, with privacy by default in mind, by privacy by design in mind, I'm sorry. Concepts, an organization would be better off in, you know, designing new applications and system and, you know, maybe not collecting as much PII as they used to, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So before giving some time for anyone in the audience to ask questions, Ben, last questions for you about what's the standard is structured? What's the actual?
You were breaking up, but I think I got the question. So the ISO 27001 really the ISO 27701 really in a nutshell. So you have a bulk of controls that are additional to the ISO 27001 controls, but then you have two new segments. One is an additional controls for PII controllers, and the other one is an additional bunch of controls for PII processors. And those controls, you know, they revolve around the concepts such as, you know, the conditions for collecting and processing information, you know, the consent, privacy impact assessments, as we all know, like PIAs, the contracts that you need to be keeping in place with processors if you're a controller. Privacy by design is an entire subject there. How you share and transfer PII is also covered there. So very, you know, two groups of additional controls that are very focused on PII, like how you treat PII, how you transfer it, and, you know, the consent mechanism that you have in place, and and other privacy mechanisms that you have in place. I'm hoping that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, thanks for that. So I actually think we covered everything we wanted to cover, and we'll be happy to take any questions from the audience that is left. Anyone, anything?
If you want to put anyone on the spot, just call out their name, then we'll see what happens.
Let's see what Shelly. I think we have a very interesting guest here, Shelly. She is of a very big insurance company in Israel.
I happen to know that she might be a bit ill, so I'm not sure if she could take your question right now. Maybe try put on the spot someone else.
No, I think that's my.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay, so I want to thank everyone for joining. I hope it was beneficial.
I do have a question. Sorry. I'm Moran. I'm from Israel, from a consulting company called PrimeSec, and I can't see the benefit of giving my client this kind of certificate, because no matter what I do, I need to comply with other laws and regulations. So what is the benefit?
I would actually like Dan to address this question if possible.
Sure. So I would see two separate types of benefits from certifying with ISO 27701. The first one is that the ISO 27000 family is an ISMS type of standards, and meaning that it requires the company to think of an information management system. And when you get into this type of mindset, it can help the company to form the necessary controls that are needed under data protection laws and predominantly under GDPR in a sort of a very organized type of framework. So it may help the company with its internal compliance procedures. I've seen it happening. It's not necessarily that it will help any type of company. It depends on the persona as well. But I think that it at least has the potential of helping organizing the compliance work better. So this is one benefit that is potentially that companies could benefit from. The other, I would say, that is more on the contractual aspect, and this is something that we encounter a great deal. That this, I mean, companies, especially vendors, companies who provide services on a B2B level, would tend to have or be under a requirement to show that they are compliant with known popular standards in order to provide the necessary comfort to their clients. And this is something that has been going on for quite a while. I think that the US was for the US market was the first one to use this type of engagements on a B2B level, and this type of comfort, and other jurisdictions have taken after them gradually. And I think that what we see is that gradually the ISO 27701 takes sort of a place in that aspect of providing that type of comfort, meaning that both CISOs and DPOs on the client side would be comfortable with understanding that their vendor is ISO certified and has also taken the additional effort, not just to be ISO 27001 certified, but to do the additional supplement to the ISO 27701. And therefore, from contractual perspective, it could be beneficial as well.
A competitive advantage.
Yeah. What we see, for example, and this is something that could evolve to something that could make the ISO 27701 more beneficial. For example, I don't know if you're familiar with the Microsoft DPR, the data protection requirements, the process that they have their vendors go through. So essentially, if you're a vendor, a Microsoft vendor, and you're ISO 27001 certified, then you're off the hook from a great chunk of information security related requirements in order to win the Microsoft approval of you as a vendor. And this is something that happened with the ISO 27001, and what we gradually see is that a lot of companies adopt the same type of assessment process, and we see more and more references to the ISO 27701 and not just the ISO 27001. And so it could also be beneficial in that perspective. It's still a sort of a young type of certification, and we need to it will take some time to see how the market adopts. The adoption rate is, of course, a relevant factor that needs to take into consideration, but I would say that there are already benefits, and the benefits could be larger as we progress in time. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So I see, Nitzan got his answer as well. Any other questions? Okay, so I want to thank everyone for joining. I want to thank Jody, Dan, and Ben for being here and providing us with this insight. And we encourage you to keep your data secure and private.
Thanks everyone for coming. Really appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you
very much.
Sure.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.